What if the soldiers sworn to protect us were forced to forget the one thing they were never meant to see? In the spaces between memory and silence, something waits watching, patient, and never quite forgotten. It was the kind of room that didn't echo. No windows, no insignias, just steel chairs, a humming fluorescent bulb, and 3 men in gray suits who didn't blink enough. The young airman had just returned from a patrol off the coast of Guam. He couldn't explain what they'd seen, and worse, he'd been the one to fire. The disc had risen slowly, deliberately, like it had waited for their plane. No sound, no thrust, just motion that made no sense. It shimmered with a dull, mercury sheen, hovering just out of missile range, until it wasn't. Until it was right there, close enough to reflect the panicked face of the gunner in the canopy glass. Orders were shouted, buttons pressed, and the thing, whatever it was, vanished before impact, not exploded, not evaded, gone. When the plane landed, no one came to greet them. The tower didn't respond. Base was in blackout. By the time they were escorted to the debriefing, his pilot was already gone. Transferred, they said. But the pilot had a pregnant wife and a lease on base housing. No one transferred that fast. Inside the room, the airman was handed a glass of water and asked to recount the event word for word. He did, twice. Then one of the gray suits nodded, clicked a pen that didn't write, and said softly, "You were never here. You never saw it. Do you understand?" And the next thing he remembered was waking up in his bunk. 48 hours later, no memory of the interview, no mission logs, and no pilot. His report file was blank. He was discharged weeks later for emotional fatigue. They gave him a medal that didn't exist and told him to keep it in a drawer. But the dreams didn't stop. Every night he saw the disc again, hovering silently, spinning without sound, a hole in the sky shaped like a question. And then, always, there was the moment it looked back, not turned, not pivoted, just looked, as if it had always known they'd be there, as if it recognized him. He tried to tell his wife once. She smiled too wide and said maybe he was just tired. The next day, she didn't remember the conversation, or that they'd had one. Years later, at a VA clinic, he mentioned it to a psychologist. The man asked if he'd ever flown over the Pacific in 1952. The airman nodded. The doctor stood, closed the door quietly, and whispered, "They told me the same thing. I still have the scar." That was the last session they had. The doctor disappeared. But the nightmares kept coming. And so did the feeling that something had been watching him ever since. Not following, not threatening, just waiting. Waiting for him to remember what they made him forget. It happened during a joint surveillance mission in the spring of 1964, just as dusk bled into the Sea of Japan. The skies were clear. The radar wasn't. At exactly 2100 hours, the screens went blank, not with static, not with error, but just blank. As if the sky had stopped being real. Lieutenant Randall Sheen was flying solo, 500 miles off the coast, tracking what command called a temperature anomaly. No other details, just coordinates and a warning, do not engage. Randall didn't even see the thing at first, just the sick feeling in his stomach and a strange pressure behind his eyes. Then came the sound. Not a boom, not even a hum. More like the silence had grown teeth. His instrument started spinning. Altitude, fuel, direction, all unreadable. The jet bucked sideways, like it had been slapped by God. He screamed into the radio. No one answered. That was when the shadow came, not from above, from within. He saw it through the canopy glass, a slow ripple, a smear in the air, shaped like a teardrop. It didn't shine, it absorbed. He said it looked like reality forgot to render. And then, something tore through the jet's left wing. No missile, no explosion, just gone. He ejected. The sea met him in a blaze of cold. A rescue team recovered him less than 3 hours later. The jet? Never found. And Randall Sheen never flew again. Instead, he was brought to a facility that wasn't on any map. Underground. No clocks. No windows. They questioned him daily. But not about the crash. They asked if he remembered feeling watched as a child, if he ever heard his name whispered by machines, if he'd ever lost time. He answered truthfully. That was the mistake. They called it containment. He called it prison. Days passed, maybe weeks. He was told the mission never existed, that the ejection was part of a simulation, that he'd failed a psychological exam. But one night, a nurse slipped him a file. No name, no signature, just a single page. On it, a sketch he had drawn in debrief. The shape that hit his wing, a ripple in the air. Beside it, a satellite image dated 3 years earlier. Same shape, different ocean, same silence. He never saw that nurse again. Eventually, he was released under watch. A different name. A desk job in logistics. His flight records were sealed, and if he ever told anyone what he remembered, someone would come. Randall Sheen died in 2009. No family. No funeral. Just one note taped to the underside of his desk drawer, in handwriting that wasn't his. Still watching, still waiting. It never left the sea. Fort Ord was a quiet post most days. Wind-swept, coastal, the kind of base that smelled like salt and regulation. In the spring of 1971, a new intake of recruits arrived for basic. 37 young men, freshly buzzed, boots too clean, eyes still full of the world they left behind. That first week went normal enough. Marching, yelling, sand in everything. Then the sounds began. It started one night just after lights out. A sharp whine, like a tuning fork buried inside the skull. Not loud exactly, but inescapable. You couldn't cover your ears. It was already behind them. A few of the men sat up in their bunks, confused, rubbing their temples. By morning, they had nosebleeds. One recruit had a line of blood running from both ears. The medics said, dehydration. The sergeant said, shut up and keep moving. But it happened again, louder. This time the sound came with something worse, movement. Men found themselves waking up outside, not in the barracks, not even on base. One was curled in the middle of the motor pool with his eyes wide open. Another was discovered in the mess hall freezer, shivering and whispering numbers. He'd taken his own boots off and lined them in perfect rows like graves. Security checked the cameras. They were told to hand the tapes over. By week 3, it was happening nightly. The sound hit around 0200 hours, and like clockwork, men began to rise. Not panic, not shout, just rise. One foot, then the other. Eyes blank, arms stiff. Some walked in circles. Others stood facing the same corner for hours. A few made it to the perimeter fence and stopped facing out toward the ocean. When questioned, none of them remembered leaving their bunks. A few claimed to have seen lights, not in the sky, but beneath their eyelids, blue, pulsing. One said he heard words, but not in any language he knew, just shapes turned into tone. Then came the inspection. 3 unmarked vehicles, men in suits, a full lockdown of Barracks C. The recruits were split up, interviewed, measured, blood drawn. Then, silence. For the rest of the rotation, the nightly sounds stopped. So did the sleepwalking, but so did something else. Memory. One of the recruits, now retired and living in Idaho, would later say he has no recollection of weeks 3 through 6 at Fort Ord. His journal skips entire days. Letters he wrote home stop mid-sentence. His handwriting changes, and in one photograph taken before graduation his eyes are glowing white. The original print was stolen from his home in 1998. He says he doesn't remember hearing the sound anymore. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right across the old pine trees. He walks to the edge of his property and stands very still. His boots always point west, toward the water. The installation was buried beneath 4 stories of ice and concrete near the northern coast of Greenland, far from anything resembling civilization. Officially, it was an early warning system. Unofficially, it was called Project Echo, a joint operation run by the United States Air Force and something that didn't officially exist. It was the winter of 1966, when the nights stretched for weeks and the auroras made shadows where no shadows should be. The men stationed there were experts in radio telemetry and high-band atmospheric distortion. They monitored signals that never reached civilian ears: distortions, whispers, echoes. On January 3rd, a technician named Weaver flagged a repeating pattern. Not noise, not feedback. Language. It pulsed every 9 seconds and originated from one place lunar coordinates, specifically near the southern rim of the moon's far side. The signal was narrow, focused, and cold. But it wasn't just what it said, it was what it didn't. The message didn't translate into any known code. It didn't loop, either. It responded. When Weaver repeated a tone sequence back, the signal paused and changed pitch. It answered, like sonar across vacuum, like it was listening. Within 48 hours, the post lost external contact. The signal grew louder. It began disrupting power, lighting, even memory. One officer was found in the comms room, fingers torn bloody from carving strange symbols into the metal desk. His eyes were wide open, pupils stretched to pinholes. He said only one word before collapsing: home. Command issued a recall. But by then, the damage had already rippled. The next plane to arrive found half the station abandoned. No blood, no bodies, just empty beds and warm coffee. The surviving crew were silent. Some stood in the snow barefoot. Others smiled without blinking. One wrote furiously on the walls of the landing bay in black grease pencil, "It's not a rock. It's a throat." All tapes, logs, and equipment were seized. The station was officially decommissioned and dismantled over the next 8 months. Project Echo was erased. But in 2004, a Freedom of Information request revealed a shipping manifest from Thule Air Base that never reached its destination. Inside the cargo, several magnetic spools marked LFMON, vocal structure, non-human. The audio files were blank, or rather silent. But when played back at high volume, technicians complained of migraines and nausea. One file, when passed through thermal filters, revealed a waveform shaped like a spiral staircase, or a drill. Years later, an Air Force linguist who briefly served at the station in his 20s was asked if he ever heard the voice. He only smiled and said, "We were never meant to hear it. We were meant to repeat it." And then he bit down on a tooth that wasn't his. Inside, it was a filament of metal that didn't melt even when burned. It was mid-July, 1959, when the USS Garraway left Norfolk under a cloudless sky and headed toward Bermuda on what was filed as a routine sonar calibration exercise. On board were 112 sailors, 4 officers, and a classified cargo no one was allowed to acknowledge. The weather held. The sea was calm. The mission, according to the logs, was uneventful, until nightfall on the 3rd day, roughly 170 miles northeast of the Bermuda coast. The ship's sonar operator reported a vertical echo beneath the hull, wide, metallic, and moving faster than any known submarine. Within minutes, the crew gathered on deck to witness the breach. They described it as a dome of liquid silver, rising smooth and silent from the black water. Not a splash, not a wave, just emergence. Perfect and unnatural. Several sailors swore they saw stars reflecting off its surface before it broke the ocean's skin. One man said the dome was humming like a microwave full of bees. The captain issued a distress call that was never officially recorded. Then he ordered red alert. The ship began to list slowly at first, then violently. The engines sputtered and failed. One of the gunners shouted that the water was boiling beneath the stern. And then something darker happened. The communications officer attempted to record visual footage. The camera jammed. When he opened the compartment, the film inside was blank, not overexposed, just gone, stripped clean. That's when the captain gave the order, not to abandon ship, not to fight, but to flood the compartments. He told his crew they were to evacuate immediately. The Garraway was to go down. They scuttled her. A nearby cutter picked up the survivors by morning. 43 made it. The rest were listed as drowned. The official cause, catastrophic mechanical failure. The phrase used in the inquiry was structural compromise due to saltwater corrosion. But in a bar in Key West 3 years later, a retired machinist's mate told a very different story. He said they didn't sink because they had to. They sank her because of what was underneath her. Because it had looked up. Because when the dome began to sink back into the ocean, something moved beneath it. Something shaped like a hand, but with too many fingers. Years later, in 1991, a declassified satellite image revealed an oddly shaped depression on the seafloor in the exact location of the Garraway's last signal. Circular, smooth, and glowing faintly in infrared. Divers sent to investigate experienced instrument failure, panic attacks, and hallucinations. The mission was quietly canceled, and to this day, no naval ship is permitted to enter that zone. Not because of danger, but because there's nothing left to prove. The dome never returned. But neither did the film. And at the bottom of that trench lies a steel plate from the Garraway's hull, bent inward. Vandenberg Air Force Base, summer of 1984. The project was called Starfield V, though no one outside a very specific chain of command knew that. It was officially a high-atmosphere imaging satellite, but insiders referred to it as a first-look energy deterrent, military code for a laser-based defense prototype. The idea was simple: deploy the satellite, arm it with directed energy, and test its ability to neutralize theoretical airborne threats before they reached American airspace. It never made it to orbit. The countdown began just after midnight. Clear skies, no solar interference. The launch pad was lit like a movie set, perfect conditions. But at T-minus 11 seconds, the radar operator noticed something strange. A secondary blip on the monitor. Not a bird, not debris. It hovered, then moved in a perfect right-angle turn. No aircraft in known history could do that. They launched anyway. The rocket screamed into the sky, shedding stage after stage. Ground control confirmed all systems nominal. That is, until the payload reached the edge of low orbit. At that exact moment, telemetry readings spiked. External sensors registered a heat surge coming from above the satellite, not from within. A soft hum filled the monitoring room. Several men covered their ears. Though no sound had been emitted through the speakers, the feed cut out. When the video returned 3 seconds later, the satellite was intact, but the laser had discharged. Not downward, upward, into nothing. There was no command to fire. The discharge ruptured one of the primary circuits and crippled the platform. Debris spiraled in slow, controlled arcs, almost like they were being guided away from Earth. One camera, still active, caught a brief glimmer of something reflecting sunlight. Not a shape, a shimmer. Then it was gone. A full security sweep followed. Logs were scrubbed. Personnel were reassigned. The incident was labeled a thermal malfunction caused by unknown cosmic interference. But General Rawls, then in charge of classified weapons development, spoke off the record 15 years later during a cancer ward interview. He leaned close to the nurse, removed his oxygen mask, and whispered, "The lasers didn't fail. They obeyed." When asked what that meant, He only smiled and added, "Whatever's up there didn't like being pointed at." The footage from Starfield 5 was sealed under a black compartment designation one level above top secret, but in 2007, a whistleblower leaked a single frame from the launch. It showed a thin beam of light, twisted slightly, as if it had been bent by something invisible. A week later, the image vanished from every archive, no takedown notice, no digital trace. And at Vandenberg today, that launch pad remains inactive. Not for repairs, but because nothing grows there anymore. Not weeds, not moss, not even mold, as if something scorched more than just the air. The convoy rolled out just after dawn, 7 armored trucks loaded with fuel, equipment, and rations. It was supposed to be a standard run-straight route, clear skies, and no signs of Taliban movement for over 2 weeks. This was Kandahar province, late autumn, 2008. The kind of heat that sat heavy in your lungs, with flat sand stretching in every direction like the world had been erased. Radio check was clean. The lead driver, Corporal Vega, signed off at 0800 hours. The next transmission was never received. 3 days later, they were found. All 7 vehicles sat motionless in a dry basin, 26 kilometers off course, a place no GPS had ever registered as a viable path. The trucks were intact in shape, but their surfaces had warped metal panels bubbled outward like they'd been exposed to a blast furnace, but with no soot, no flame, no sign of detonation. The interiors were worse, seats melted, radios fused to the dashboard. One truck had a steering wheel twisted into a perfect figure 8, like soft clay. There were no bodies, no blood, no tracks. The men weren't inside. They were found a few kilometers north, barefoot and wandering in circles. Some were crying. Others, mumbling in broken Spanish or Pashto languages they did not speak. One of them, a private who hadn't spoken a word since basic training, was screaming the same phrase over and over. It was a mirror. It was a mirror. It was a mirror. They were all medically stable. No signs of dehydration, no wounds. But not one of them remembered driving. Not one of them knew where they had gone, or how long they'd been gone. When shown photos of the trucks, several began vomiting. One had a seizure. The black box data was corrupted. Temperature readings reached impossible highs over 1,000 degrees Celsius for a fraction of a second, then dropped to freezing. One entry recorded lunar shadow event. No one could explain what that meant. A retrieval team airlifted the trucks to a secure base in Bagram. They disappeared from all manifests within 48 hours. Later, a contractor with knowledge of the investigation said something strange had been found under the floor mat of Truck 3. A thin shard of what looked like black glass, humming faintly even when isolated in lead casing. When scanned with X-ray, it showed not solid mass but depth. Infinite, spiraling depth. The shard was gone the next morning. All surviving members of the convoy were reassigned stateside, placed on permanent psychological leave. Some tried to resume normal lives. Most failed. Corporal Vega lives alone in Arizona now. He never talks about the desert, but he keeps all his mirrors covered. Even his phone screen is scratched beyond recognition. He says it's not paranoia, just respect, because when the desert looked back at him, it blinked. He was small, wiry, the kind of soldier who could fold himself into the dark and wait without breathing. In 1969, they called him Tunnel Rat Delta 7. Real name, Corporal Edward Hall. His job was simple. Crawl into enemy tunnels, map them, clear them, come back alive. Most didn't. He did. Over and over. Until the day he didn't. It happened near the Quang Tri province. They had intel about a deep tunnel complex used by the Viet Cong, rumored to stretch for miles. Delta 7 went in with a flashlight, a sidearm, and a single coil of rope. The others waited above, checking their watches, counting breaths. Then something went wrong. 3 hours passed. Then 4. Radio silence. No movement. Finally, the rope began to twitch, slow and hesitant, like something pulling from the other side. When they hauled him up, Hall was shaking, covered in clay, eyes wide. He kept whispering the same phrase over and over. Not English, not Vietnamese, a language no one recognized. He had gone down with one flashlight. He came back with two. The second was not standard issue. According to the recovery logs later sealed, it was smooth, black, and cold as ice. Even under the jungle, Sunday, no buttons, no seams. But when they pointed it at a wall, the soil shimmered. Hall wouldn't let it go. When medics tried to sedate him, he began drawing in the dirt. Symbols, coils, lines shaped like spirals, and teeth. He said he had found a room, a chamber below the tunnels, carved from the rock like it had grown there. The walls glowed, not from bulbs, from language. He began speaking in that same alien tongue in his sleep. Then, while awake, he stopped speaking English altogether. Within 24 hours, he was airlifted to a black site medical facility just outside Da Nang. Diagnosis: acute stress disorder, auditory hallucinations, schizophrenia. The only problem, he never showed signs of mental illness before. No head trauma, no drugs in his system, no fever. Just language that bent the air when he spoke it. A linguist flown in from Okinawa claimed the sounds had structure, mathematics woven into phonetics. But when he tried to record it, the tape dissolved inside the machine. Not snapped, not erased, dissolved. Hall stopped eating, claimed he no longer needed to. Said the words fed him now. He vanished from the facility 1 week later. No one saw him leave. No one heard him go. But on the wall of his isolation room, scrawled in that same glowing script, was a final message translated years later by a cryptologist who would later go missing. We speak not to be heard. We speak to remember. He remembers now. Edward Hall was declared dead in absentia in 1978, but in 2013, a photograph surfaced from a cave system in Laos. Faint, blurred, but unmistakable. A man, thin and smiling, etched in bioluminescent light, writing. It was Christmas Eve, 1973, and the graveyard shift at NORAD's Clear Air Force Station in Alaska had gone quiet. Outside, snow fell in sheets so thick it muffled the base generators. Inside, the radar room glowed with cold green light and the low hum of caffeine and repetition. Technician First Class Leonard Bryce sat alone at the monitoring terminal, halfway through a crossword puzzle and trying not to think about his wife's voice on the phone that morning. He wasn't supposed to be here tonight. No one ever was, really. Not when it happened. At 2300 hours, the screen flickered. Bryce tapped the console. Static was normal. Ghost signatures happened. But this wasn't ghosting. The screen didn't fuzz, it went white. Not a flash, not a flare. A perfect circle, luminous and smooth, bloomed over the northern Alaskan airspace. It stretched nearly 600 miles in diameter, pulsing in slow rhythm, too symmetrical to be storm interference, and far too large for any known aircraft. It did not move. It did not fade. It watched. Bryce called it in. Command told him to stand by, but before backup arrived, the circle pulsed again. This time the lights in the radar room dimmed. His headset buzzed not with static, but with a low murmur that he would later describe as the sound of a cathedral breathing. Then it vanished. No signature, no data trail, just gone. The other techs arrived minutes later to find Bryce standing perfectly still, his eyes locked on the blank screen, his lips moving, but no sound coming out. He was taken for medical evaluation. The report was sealed. He never spoke again. They said it was stress, hallucination brought on by isolation. But one of the shift commanders, a woman named Captain Renee Voss, didn't buy it. She had seen the footage. Briefly, before it was pulled, She described the shape as not round, not oval, more like the pupil of something very, very large. She was transferred within 48 hours. In the years that followed, other signatures were reported, though never on holidays, always at dusk, always north, and always accompanied by that strange pulse in the power grid. NORAD stopped logging the anomalies after 1981. Or at least, they stopped admitting to them. Leonard Bryce remained under long-term psychiatric observation until his death in 2002. He never uttered a single word. But shortly after his passing, a nurse cleaning out his personal drawer found a note scribbled in the margin of an old crossword puzzle. 5 letters, starts with G, ends with D. The clue simply read, "It blinked." He had no name when he stepped forward. Just a face shaded by the light of a motel lamp in Nevada, hands that trembled when he lit a cigarette, and a voice that cracked like old wood. He said it happened in the spring of 1972. Not a crash, a landing. That was the difference. Groom Lake had protocols for crashes. They did not have protocols for something that landed on purpose. The object appeared just after 2 a.m, descending in absolute silence onto the salt flats beyond the runway. No fire, no engine, no sound, just presence. From a distance, it looked like polished obsidian shaped into a crescent, casting no shadow under the high floodlights. It did not open, it did not glow, but the air around it buzzed, as if the atmosphere itself had been slightly rewired. Base Command issued immediate lockdown. Every person on site was given a single instruction: do not approach. But orders don't mean much when curiosity tightens the chest like a vice. A team of 12 was selected to secure the perimeter. None of them were seen again. Correction. They were seen, but not as themselves. 2 weeks later, the whistleblower claimed he was reassigned to an internal interview team. His job was to debrief those 12 men now housed in separate, windowless rooms. He said they didn't speak in words anymore. They communicated in gestures, movements, synchronized blinking. One of them began tapping Morse code with his fingernails, except the pattern translated into no known language. It was just rhythm, like a heartbeat, but backwards. Then, one by one, they vanished. No formal discharge, no death certificates, no transfer papers. Their records were rewritten, their names reassigned to people who never existed. And anyone who asked about them started receiving night visits, vehicles idling just outside their homes, phone calls with no voice on the other end, dreams that weren't dreams. The object remained on the flats for 3 days. Then, on the morning of the 4th, it was simply gone. No footage captured its departure. Cameras pointed at it failed. The only clue left behind was a faint, circular depression in the salt, not scorched but smoothed like glass after flame. Years later, the whistleblower changed identities 3 times. Each time, the memories came back sharper. He said it wasn't trauma, it was instruction. He'd been taught to forget, but the forgetting unraveled backwards. In his last recorded message, smuggled through a private journalist, he said, "They didn't land to be discovered, they landed to assign. And we were the ink." That journalist disappeared 1 week after publishing the transcript. The motel was burned down. The fire report said faulty wiring. But the fire inspector's notes, scribbled in the margin, said one thing: no signs of ignition, just erasure. It was just after noon when the formation of 4 A-10 Warthogs lifted from Nellis Air Force Base, bound for a simple training loop over the Nevada test range. Weather was clear. Visibility perfect. The mission was logged as routine. It was July 1994. The lead pilot, Captain Alana Pierce, confirmed radio check at 22,000 feet. The aircraft were staggered in diamond formation, standard for low-threat navigation. Ground control tracked them with no issues until minute 17 of the flight. Then, the radar signatures blinked out. All four. Gone. No warning. No static. Just erasure. Ground crews scrambled. A search alert was prepared. But before they could dispatch a scramble team, the warthogs reappeared on radar, exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds later, flying the same course, at the same altitude, completely unaware they had vanished. Captain Pierce landed first. Her voice was calm, measured, confused. She'd been told they were missing for 3 minutes. She insisted no, swore they were never off the grid. From their perspective, the gap had lasted no more than 10 seconds. They had seen something. She described it like flying through glass. 1 second clear sky, the next, a shimmer, like heat waves on a highway but in the air, and vertical. When they passed through it, the world went quiet, not soundless, vacuumed, like something pressed against the bones, muting the inside of your head. Then the sky returned. Each pilot was pulled for separate debriefing. Every one of them told the same story down to the second, but the black boxes disagreed. Recovered from the aircraft within the hour, all 4 flight recorders displayed nearly 3 full minutes of corrupted data. Not blank, not static, just warped, time-stamped sequences that looped over themselves, as if trying to rewrite a moment that didn't want to be kept. One box, Unit 2, contained a single frame of audio, barely half a second. When isolated, it revealed a deep clicking sound layered beneath what sounded like reversed breathing. An analyst tried to enhance it. She suffered a seizure. The black boxes were sealed and classified under the Project Valkyrie clearance tier. Captain Pierce and her squadron were reassigned within 72 hours. 2 resigned. 1 vanished. Pierce herself left the service 6 months later and refused all interviews until 1 midnight in 2006, when she left a voicemail on a retired engineer's landline. Just 3 words. "We weren't alone." The engineer called back. The number was disconnected. Today, that section of airspace is listed as permanently restricted. No flyovers, no satellites, no explanation. Locals call it the 10-second gap. And on clear days, ranchers nearby swear they see warthogs pass overhead, followed by their echoes, 3 minutes later. The surveyor's name was Lieutenant Carl Mason, Royal Canadian Air Force, attached to a joint U.S.-Canada Arctic mapping initiative in the fall of 1967. He was young, meticulous, and known for his steady hand behind a camera back when mapping still relied on manual triangulation and aerial photography shot on film. That day, the mission was simple. Document a remote glacial body near Red Lake, Ontario. Take 3 exposures from the side hatch of a low-altitude recon aircraft. Log coordinates. Return to base. The lake was frozen over. The landscape quiet, blanketed in white. Nothing unusual. Until they developed the film. The first 2 photos were exactly what they expected. A frozen basin, cracked ice, tree line. But the 3rd photo made the room fall silent. It showed the lake not from the side, not from the aircraft, but from directly above, from space. And not just the lake. The image captured the curve of the Earth's horizon, complete with shadowed atmosphere and faint stars behind the blue. No aircraft could have taken that shot. Not in 1967. Not with that clarity. Not without leaving the planet. They checked the camera. It was his. Same roll. No sign of tampering. No missing negatives. Just 3 frames. 2 normal. 1 impossible. Mason was pulled for questioning. Not reprimanded. Not punished. Just questioned. Again and again. He said nothing unusual happened. He remembered taking all 3 shots. He remembered the chill, the wind, the silence. But when they showed him the 3rd photo, his face changed. Not confusion. Recognition. He asked them one thing. "Do you see the reflection?" They hadn't. Zooming in on the lake in the image, right at the center, was a glimmer. Not sunlight, not ice. A shape, hexagonal, metallic. As if something had been there. floating just above the water, and the camera, impossibly, had captured it from above. 2 days later, Mason was gone. The official record states he requested reassignment due to stress, but his personal items were never collected. His family was told he'd entered a restricted service program. They were not given further details. The photo was filed under classified satellite anomalies, but in 1999, a former archivist at CFB North Bay leaked a low-res scan of the image. It made its way onto a fringe conspiracy forum and vanished within hours. The poster's account was deleted. Their IP address traced to a decommissioned radar station. Some say Mason wasn't taken. They say he was returned to where the photo was taken, not the lake. The perspective. They say he was allowed to remember how he got the shot, and that's why he stopped speaking. Because once you've seen the Earth from a place humans shouldn't reach, everything below starts to feel like a lie. It never made the newspapers. Not the date. Not the crew. Not the capsule. They called it Orion Theta. But those who knew whispered the truth: Apollo's military twin. Launched not from Kennedy but from a black site in the Pacific in early 1973, months after Apollo 17 supposedly marked the end of the moon landings. The crew? 3 men. Chosen not from NASA's civilian ranks but from deep within the Air Force and Naval Intelligence. Astronauts by training, soldiers by nature. They were told it was a surveillance mission, low lunar orbit, reconnaissance, rapid return. They were told it was safe. They were told wrong. According to the lone surviving contractor who spoke anonymously in a taped interview before his death in 1998, the craft did not just orbit, it landed. Not at Tranquility Base, not even on the near side. It touched down in the Mare Orientale Basin, where radar signals bend and compasses fail. Contact was lost for 42 minutes. When signal returned, the commander's voice was ragged, strained. He did not acknowledge the ground team's hails. He simply said one thing: "It's looking back." No further transmissions were received. The capsule splashed down 6 days later, intercepted by naval recovery vessels that did not fly the American flag. The men were carried out on stretchers, conscious but blank. Eyes open, not blinking. The black box had been scrubbed clean. What was inside the cargo bay was sealed in layered shielding, then moved by air to an unmarked facility beneath the White Sands Missile Range. The item never described, never photographed, was quarantined in a vacuum containment chamber lined with mirrors. When light was shined upon it, the reflection didn't match. The 3 astronauts were placed in indefinite isolation. Within weeks, 2 suffered complete neurological collapse. The 3rd Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Farron escaped containment for 9 minutes before being subdued. In that window, he etched symbols into the observation glass using only his fingernails. The marks could not be photographed. Cameras would not focus. He spoke once. "It knows where we aren't." Shortly after, he stopped sleeping. They said he died in 1974, but no body was released. And when an FOIA request was filed in 2005, the death certificate returned bore a different name entirely. The capsule was buried, not dismantled, not studied, buried beneath concrete and salt. They did not want to risk breaking its skin. As for what they brought back, no one knows if it was living, or a signal, or simply a container for something older than memory. But the contractor, in that final interview, said one thing he was never able to forget. The moon didn't give us something, it returned it. Commander Ellis was not a man given to fantasy. 30 years in the Navy, steel in his spine, and silence in his blood. He captained the USS Hillston, a fast attack submarine on classified patrol near the Kuril Trench in the winter of 1982. Nothing was out of the ordinary until he raised the periscope. He had been scanning the gray wash of waves, surface winds stirring whitecaps under a moonless sky. No vessels, no signals, just a routine sweep. Then he saw the eye. Not a light, not a shape, an eye. It filled the lens, dark, wet, and aware. It blinked. Ellis staggered back. He ordered the periscope lowered, the sub submerged deeper, and red alert protocols engaged. But the crew hadn't seen anything. The sonar techs reported nothing. The water was clear, quiet, normal. Except it wasn't. That night, the entire crew began hearing sounds through the hull. Not knocks, not whale song, breathing. Rhythmic, slow, as if something was pacing the length of the submarine, but only Ellis saw it. When he returned to the periscope later, against regulation, the lens fogged over from the outside. The next morning, the logbook was missing. His entries, gone. The security cabinet had not been forced. The watch officers claimed no one had entered his quarters. But Ellis knew what he'd written. Every line, every angle of that pupil. He tried to rewrite it, but when he opened his pen, the ink was already used. They surfaced near Okinawa 4 days later. A medical team was waiting. The entire crew was reassigned, not as a unit, not with notice, split across bases from Iceland to Diego Garcia. Names changed, service records scrubbed. When one sailor tried to reach another 3 years later, his letters came back marked undeliverable. Another tried to visit Ellis at a retirement ceremony. He was told Ellis had never served aboard the Hillston, but the Hillston had sailed. The logs proved it, except for one. The patrol record for that week in 1982 was missing from the Naval Archives. Not redacted absent, as if the submarine had disappeared. Years later, a junior officer found a damaged lens cap inside a sealed crate during a museum inventory in San Diego. It was labeled USS Hillston, Optical Unit 3. Scratched into the inside rim, barely visible unless the light hit just right, was a phrase carved in shaky hand. "Stop looking back. It sees better than you." Ellis was never found, but in some circles, they say the eye is still out there, beneath the ice, beneath the black, waiting for another periscope to blink first. They weren't all brought for rocketry. That's what the file said, the one misfiled behind layers of redacted folders in a base archive beneath Huntsville. Operation Paperclip, known for delivering Wernher von Braun and his team to America's rocket labs, was broader than most realized. It wasn't just propulsion. It was communication. It was frequency research. And one name kept reappearing: Dr. Siegfried Krüger. Officially, Krüger was dismissed from the program in 1952 due to mental instability. But the truth lay deeper. He had no formal rocket patents, no flight designs. What he brought over in a leather-bound satchel were blueprints for something else entirely. Drawings of what he called resonant mass transport engines, annotated in fractured Latin, Old High German, and symbols no one at Langley could translate. One diagram was labeled simply Fahrstuhl zum Nachthof, the elevator to the courtyard of night. Another showed a hollowed sphere orbiting Earth, lined with latticework that pulsed in cycles. Beneath it was a caption, translated with difficulty: "Occupants rotate. They do not sleep. We were warned not to knock." When questioned, Krüger insisted he had not invented these diagrams. He had found them discovered in the ruins of a burnt-down observatory outside Prague in the spring of 1945. The observatory had no records of ever existing. Krüger said they weren't alone on the moon. He spoke of tenants, not colonizers, not invaders, tenants, as if whoever was there had been given permission, or worse, had always owned the lease. His final interview transcript was never officially stored, but a carbon copy surfaced in a closed estate auction in 1997. It read like prophecy. "We tried to listen with rockets," he said, "but they measure sound in stillness. Not in thrust, not in burn, in the pause. That is where they speak." When asked who they were, Krüger went silent for 8 minutes. Then he drew a symbol on the wall with his finger, a spiral, bisected, like an eye opening sideways. He died 48 hours later. Heart failure was the official note, but his body showed signs of extreme radiation exposure despite never having worked near fissionable material. After his death, his diagrams were sealed, not destroyed, not analyzed, sealed. But a decade later, during a shuttle diagnostic test at Kennedy, a faint symbol was discovered etched into the housing of a fuel regulator. Same spiral. Same eye. No one claimed responsibility. The part had passed through 3 facilities and 2 international vendors. And yet, there it was. Not a warning. Not a threat. A signature. One that whispered through vacuum, across decades. We left the door open. They came through. You brought the key. It was called Echo Station. Officially, it didn't exist. Located more than 300 miles inland from the Antarctic coast, buried beneath layers of ice and secrecy, it was part of a joint signal triangulation experiment, a Cold War-era effort to detect Soviet subvibrations or missile launches using seismic resonance. But the men stationed there knew better. There was nothing Soviet about what they were listening for. The base ran on silence. Its generators were sound-dampened. Radios operated in bursts. Every movement was recorded in logs and echoed against vibration sensors embedded in the ice below. For almost 2 years, the station functioned without incident, until winter of 1967. On June 12th, at 0200 hours, all outbound communication ceased. The radio operator at McMurdo Station logged the final transmission, a simple, monotone phrase repeated 12 times, each message coming from a different operator's ID tag. It's beneath us. Then, nothing. No emergency code, no signal loss ramp-up, just an empty, humming line. Rescue flights were grounded for 3 days due to weather. When a team finally arrived, Echo Station was intact. Lights were still on, doors sealed, power systems operational. But no one remained. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no discarded equipment. Even the kitchen was untouched. Plates set. Soup half-eaten. The station's clock system had stopped at the exact same time on every wall 0217. The beds were made. All personal effects were gone. Only one thing remained out of place. A crack in the reinforced floor of the signal lab, less than an inch wide, but too deep to measure. When they dropped a weighted line into it, there was no impact, just the line unwinding. After 70 feet, it snapped. Recordings from the final hours were scrambled except one fragment recovered from a backup reel. Faint static. Then a voice, filtered and distant. Do you remember building this? We do. The tape degraded when exposed to light. The station was sealed, buried, wiped from inventory. But years later, in 1989, a French expedition drilling ice cores in the same sector reported a brief seismic anomaly, a pulse, not tectonic, not weather, a signal. When the core sample was pulled up, they found a layer of compressed soot organic carbon traces dated back almost 50,000 years. Buried in that soot, a fragment of man-made alloy. Etched with English letters, the piece was later stolen. What few believe, but some insist, is that Echo Station didn't vanish. It was answered. And what answered didn't climb out of the ice. It pulled them in. In the answered. A spring of 1951, a young airman named Russell Gaines was stationed at an outpost near the Imjin River during the Korean War. He was quiet, bookish, barely 20, and kept mostly to himself. But he had a habit, one that made him a curiosity to the others. He sketched. Not just doodles or pin-up girls like most of the guys. He drew machines, engines, structures that didn't exist yet, shapes that curved the wrong way but still felt aerodynamic. One night, during a routine night watch, Russell saw something. No noise. No movement. Just stillness in the sky. Like the air had stopped breathing. The stars shifted, he would later write, and a shape drifted into view. Oval, but faceted. Metal, but soft around the edges, like it had grown rather than been built. Lights pulsed along its frame in sets of 7, in a rhythm that reminded him of breathing. He stared for maybe 20 seconds, maybe more. Then it vanished. The next morning, he didn't say a word. He just sat at the mess hall and drew. Not frantically, not in shock, methodically, as if remembering something from a dream he hadn't known was his. He filled 3 pages in his notebook, cross-sections, projections, markings. One labeled ventral bloom cavity. Another noted, no exhaust, but thermal distortion present. The drawings were confiscated during a routine locker inspection 1 week later. The officer who found them turned them over to intelligence. Gaines was called in. Asked why he had classified schematics in his possession, he told them, "I saw it 2 weeks ago." He was discharged shortly after. Schizophrenia, they said. Hallucinations. His records were sealed. 6 decades later, in 2011, a reconnaissance drone flying over the Anbar province in Iraq captured a 32-second video feed of a high-altitude object, pacing it from above. The object was never intercepted. It did not appear on radar. But the video showed it clearly. The image was leaked and blurred. But in the unedited still, later obtained by an unnamed aviation historian, the object matched every angle of Russell Gaines's drawing, down to the ventral curvature, down to the pattern of 7 lights. Gaines had passed away 2 years earlier, living quietly in a VA home. His belongings were sold in a public estate auction. Among them, never opened, was a second notebook, labeled only, "Seen once, remembered always." Inside were pages filled with stars, with orbit paths, with an equation no one has yet translated. On the final page, a question, "If I saw it then, whose memory was I drawing from?" And below it, a signature not in English, not in any known language, but it was signed. They were stationed at an undisclosed outpost near the Euphrates, monitoring heat signatures from above. It was a night mission. Clean air, clear sky. Routine sweep. The drone feed came back stable. Coordinates marked, nothing visible on the ground but old ruins and shadowed rock. Then, at exactly 2300 hours, something shifted. Not on screen, not in the visuals, in the sound, or rather the absence of it. Every operator in the control trailer, 7 of them by count, went still at the same moment, not frozen from fear, not reacting to visuals, just still. One of them, Sergeant Morales, dropped his headset. Another began to hum softly, tunelessly, as if to fill a silence too large for thought. The trailer's recording logs, when reviewed later, showed perfect, clinical quiet, not static, not interference, just a full minute of uninterrupted digital nothing, like someone had hit mute on the entire Earth. Afterwards, all 7 operators claimed they had heard something, not a noise, not a machine, a voice, female, they said, calm, unaccented, speaking in a way that bypassed the ears entirely. Like it was being remembered in real time instead of heard. The words were different for each man. One claimed it said, "You have woken up in the wrong story." Another heard, "This is not your war. You are only borrowing it." A third, the youngest, broke down, sobbing when he tried to repeat what he heard. He never fully recovered. An internal investigation was launched. Headsets were checked. Brain scans ordered. One analyst even proposed a mass fugue state brought on by fatigue or heat stroke. But then someone checked the environmental audio. All drones running live feed automatically store ambient ground-level sound, even in infrared missions. The backup audio from that mission showed a curious anomaly. When slowed down to 1/4 speed and filtered through an AI-stabilized layer, a tone emerged, high frequency, rhythmic, like syllables. Spectrogram analysis revealed something even stranger. The waveform of the tone formed a spiral, not random, not glitch, a spiral made of silence. The files were flagged and encrypted, Within 72 hours, all 7 operators were reassigned. One disappeared entirely from military roles. Another now works as a civilian, under a different name, never speaking of what happened, but a note, written in pencil on the back of an audio diagnostic sheet, was found during an unrelated audit in Langley years later. It read, "The voice wasn't saying words, it was the words, like it was the author of them, and we just caught it mid-sentence." The sheet had no signature, just a faint spiral drawn in the corner, turning inward, forever. The crater wasn't there the day before. That was the first strange thing. Satellite recon had shown a flat expanse of sand west of Basra. Nothing unusual, just wind-swept dunes and a faint shimmer of heat. But on the morning of March 6, 1991, after a sudden tremor the night before, a perfect depression had appeared, 40 feet across, circular, no scorch marks, no debris. Just sand that looked peeled, as if something had gently unzipped the desert from the inside. Private First Class Adam Teller was the first to approach. He radioed in, calm, curious. "Looks like glass at the bottom," he said, "but it's not hot." Then he stepped forward, 1 step, 2, and vanished. There was no shout, no falling, no reaction from his team. 1 second he was standing on the edge, the next gone. Not swallowed, not dragged. Gone, like a projection switched off mid-frame. The unit called for backup. Drones swept the area. Ground-penetrating radar found nothing below. Not a tunnel, not a pocket, not even disturbed layers of earth. The sand hadn't collapsed. It had rearranged itself. Hours later, at a supply station over 200 miles away, a guard on patrol found something propped upright against a concrete wall. A combat helmet. It was Teller's. Inside it was seawater. Still warm, still moving, as if it had just been scooped from a wave. A small crab, unlike any in the region, clung to the inner rim, clicking its legs against the name scrawled in faded ink. Teller, A. No other sign of the soldier was ever recovered. His weapon, his radio, his uniform, all untraceable. The crater itself sealed itself by dusk, a slow rising, like breath returning to a collapsed lung. Within hours, it was as if nothing had ever scarred the sand. But the helmet was real. The seawater tested clean but anomalously enriched in deuterium. The crab, uncatalogued, later destroyed in an accidental specimen freezer failure. A note in the after-action report, buried beneath pages of jargon and denials, offered a single sentence that was later redacted. "We believe the sand did not open it," briefly looked away. Other reports from the same week, quietly compiled under a joint anomaly task force, spoke of geometries that moved, mirages that reflected things not present, and one satellite photo that captured what looked like a second moon, hovering just above the Gulf, flickering like a wound. No official cause was given. Teller's name was engraved on a wall with others lost in the chaos. But for those who knew, it wasn't chaos. It was precision. Something had wanted him. And somewhere, maybe beyond sand, maybe beneath salt, something kept his footprint long after the desert forgot it. Base Echo 7 sat buried beneath 50 feet of ice and rock in northern Greenland, a relic of Cold War paranoia and second strike readiness. It wasn't on any public map. Its antennas didn't point up, they pointed out, hunched against the sky like frozen claws. Their job wasn't to listen for what came from Earth. Their job was to hear what wasn't supposed to be there. On January 12, 1963, the Night Watch detected a mayday, not unusual on its own. Cosmic noise sometimes arranged itself into patterns. Signals bounced off satellites and atmospheric layers. But this one was different. It repeated, clear English, calm cadence. A male voice repeating 3 words. "This is Turner. Mayday." Private Harold Turner had died 2 weeks prior. Training accident. Faulty respirator during a systems test. He never left the facility. Never saw open air again. But the voice recorded, played back, looped on every frequency was his. "This is Turner. Mayday." At first, the crew suspected a prank. An old tape somehow looped, but the equipment checked clean. No ghost signal, no echo. The transmission was coming from above geosynchronous orbit, far beyond where any of their assets should be, far beyond where any reply could have logically reached in time. Still, they answered, protocol dictated otherwise. Unknown signals were to be logged and ignored unless confirmed terrestrial. But curiosity overruled caution. They responded with a basic code phrase and identification sequence. For 7 seconds, nothing. Then every monitor in the comms room flared white. No data, no interference, just pure blank signal. Like silence had learned to shine. When the backup power kicked in, the base was no longer receiving anything. Not static, not telemetry, not even background radiation noise. Just absence. And one final, short message. "Harold is home." No one spoke. Within an hour, Echo 7 stopped responding to all Allied check-ins. 3 days later, a reconnaissance team was dispatched. They found the base sealed from the inside. The main entrance frozen shut with no signs of breach. The emergency hatch had been welded closed from within. When finally accessed, the interior showed no signs of struggle. Every bed made. Every light still on. But not a single person remained. No bodies, no footprints, no cold weather gear taken. All communications logs had been wiped, except one printed slip left in the comm center. A diagnostic readout. It showed the signal strength of the final incoming message. Its point of origin, lunar far side. Estimated transmitter size, unknown. Estimated time to Earth based on frequency delay. Over 7,000 years. The slip was marked, "Do not file." But someone did. And decades later, in a Pentagon sub-basement, a memo still circulates. In red ink, it reads, "If they call using our names, don't answer. We don't know who they learned them from." They called it Room Theta. No lights, no designation on the blueprints. It was located 3 levels beneath Cheyenne Mountain's inner perimeter, behind a false panel in the decontamination corridor. Only 5 people were ever cleared to enter. 4 are now dead. The 5th refuses to speak. Room Theta was sealed in August of 1969, less than a month after the moon landing. Inside, under permanent red surveillance lighting and reinforced glass, stands a single isolation pod. Stainless steel, sealed welds, no external hatch. Its only feature, a transparent window, fogged slightly from within. Behind that glass, visible only in silhouette under the emergency glow, is the figure, 6 feet tall, helmeted. Suit consistent with the advanced crew escape system models, but predating all known designs. No markings, no insignia, no oxygen feed visible. Yet the suit appears full, upright, as if standing on its own. The label on the archival file simply reads, "Do not access, containment priority, Theta Protocol." One technician, fresh from training in the 1970s, was told to reroute cabling near Room Theta. He opened the wall panel, saw the interior by accident, and later described the feeling of being looked at by something that had never blinked. Within weeks, he was reassigned to Antarctica. He froze to death in 1974. His body found curled beneath a satellite dish that had gone off course by exactly 1 degree. Those who've studied the internal security logs claim the pod has never moved, but photographic comparisons decades apart show a subtle change in posture. The right hand, initially clenched, now appears partially open. The left leg has shifted half an inch forward. There is no entry record for the pod. It was not brought in. There are no welding marks along the base structure of Room Theta. It is as if the chamber was built around it. A classified note buried deep within a Department of Defense psychological anomaly file refers to Theta not as a room, but as a condition. The file reads, "Subject appears inert but does not register as dead, does not reflect certain frequencies. Dreams involving the figure are reported only by staff who have never seen it. The dreams are identical, a hallway of mirrors, stretching forever, with the sound of breath inside a helmet. The last time room theta was inspected was during a blackout test in 2001. A tech left a sticky note on the monitoring console. It read, "It's fogging more. Like it's warming up." That console has since been removed. No one enters room theta now, but the cameras still run, and every 6 hours, on the dot, the light inside pulses once like a heartbeat. It started as a joke, one of those late-night hand-me-downs passed through the lower levels of naval intelligence. A folded piece of weathered paper, slipped between mission folders like contraband. No title, no legend. Just a crude topographic layout of what looked like the Martian surface. But unlike the satellite composites from NASA, this one had markings, straight lines, intersections, grid patterns that no known natural formation could explain. In one section labeled by hand with the word "Horizon," there appeared to be a set of parallel structures uniform, shadowed, with proportional spacing. Buildings, someone whispered, a city, or what was left of one. The map was traced back to an unclassified shipment from a now-defunct Air Force contractor in the 1970s. Supposedly, a test print from early Martian probe imagery, enhanced by hand for analysis. But someone had gone further. Way further. In the margins, symbols had been added, glyphs, shapes, tiny strokes of ink that looked decorative until a linguistics officer recognized them. Not Latin, not Greek, not any military cipher. They matched a tablet excavated near Uruk in the 1920s, Sumerian, predating known writing systems. A form of proto-cuneiform used not for trade or law but for myth. The Navy ran it through a translation filter. The symbols on the Martian map spelled 5 repeating characters, roughly equivalent to "those who walk behind light." The joke stopped being funny. The paper's origin was classified, then reclassified, then vanished into a drawer. But copies circulated, whispered about in quiet corners. Analysts would ask to see it during storms, as if the sound of rain made it safer. A few kept digital scans until those drives began to fail, files corrupted by magnetic interference no one could explain. One officer attempted to match the map's coordinates with NASA rover data. He got as far as overlaying the path of the Spirit rover in 2004 when his access was revoked without explanation. His credentials were frozen. He was never reassigned. The most disturbing detail wasn't the map itself, it was the wear pattern. The folds, the creases, the smudges, traces of repeated handling. Experts dated the paper to the 1950s, but the wear suggested hundreds of openings, not by analysts, by someone using it, as if it had been carried, referred to, navigated on site. There was even a note in pencil scrawled in the bottom right corner. "Red dust tastes like ash." They say the original map was eventually burned, along with every known scan. But on a wall, in a secure wing of the Pentagon, there hangs a framed replica under dim light. Beneath it is a plaque with no date and no rank. Just a question scratched in brass. How do you debrief a ghost? The expansion was supposed to be routine. In the summer of 1986, the Corps of Engineers began widening the sublevels of a Utah training base carved into desert stone. Concrete was poured. Rock was cut. Boring machines bit into the red earth with mechanical precision. It was, by all accounts, a simple dig, until they broke into the cavern. The drill head hit something that wasn't stone. It screeched, sparks flying, then slipped forward into an opening no one had expected. The cavity beyond wasn't empty. The first probe camera lowered on a cable caught only a few seconds of footage before static swallowed the feed. But in those seconds, they saw surfaces that reflected like steel, curved and seamless. as if forged rather than eroded. And then there was the movement. The footage showed a ripple across one of the walls. Not shadow, not dust, liquid. A dark, silvery flow that pooled upward instead of down, crawling against gravity like mercury with intent. The technician monitoring the screen whispered, "That's not supposed to move like that." Then the image froze. Then it burned out. The crew shut down the drill. A containment order came through from higher command within hours. The cavern was sealed. The men were relocated. Officially, it was due to a hazardous gas pocket. Unofficially, word spread among the workers. They had hit something alive. Or worse, something asleep. One soldier later admitted in confidence that he had pocketed a fragment from the drill head before it was confiscated. He described it as metal, but not too light, too cold. When he tapped it, the surface rippled like water, then returned to solid. He claimed it hummed faintly at night. 2 weeks later, he was found unconscious in his quarters, lungs filled with fluid despite no sign of drowning. The fragment was gone. The cavern was never mapped again. The entry shaft was collapsed with controlled charges, but the seismographs in the region began to register anomalies, rhythmic vibrations, patterns too precise for tectonics, too deep for machinery. They came every 23 hours, like a pulse. In 2003, a civilian contractor, running fiber optics through the old base tunnels, reported his equipment failing near the sealed shaft. His handheld recorder, however, picked up something the sensors could not. A low sound, almost a voice, layered and metallic. When slowed, it translated into fractured English, the words, "Not yet." The tape was confiscated, the contractor reassigned, and the base expansion never resumed. But beneath the desert, behind that collapsed wall, something remains, waiting, shifting. And every so often, when the ground is still enough and the wind dies, locals claim they can hear it. The sound of liquid moving where no liquid should be. It was the dead of winter, 1979, in the depths of Siberia, where the air itself felt like a weapon. The forward base was cut into permafrost, its fences half buried in snowdrifts, its barracks dimly lit by failing generators. The men stationed there were used to silence, used to cold, used to boredom, until the triangle came. It appeared without warning, midnight sky, clear stars, then suddenly a shadow that blotted them out, perfectly symmetrical. Jet black, edges sharp as if cut into the heavens. No sound, no exhaust, just presence. It hovered above the compound, directly over the command building, at an altitude too low for comfort. At first, they thought it was an experimental American craft. Cameras were readied, reports written. But then, hours passed, then days. The triangle did not move, did not tilt, did not emit a single signal. It simply waited. For 72 hours it remained there. Floodlights aimed at it dissolved into the surface, as if the light had been swallowed. Radar returned nothing but static. The air around it crackled with an energy that made men's teeth ache. One soldier reported his wristwatch running backward. Another claimed he saw the snow beneath it rise in thin streams, as if gravity itself had reversed. The general in charge, a man hardened by wars and secrecy, locked himself in his office on the second night. Witnesses said he shouted at the ceiling, shouted at the thing, called it names, ordered it to leave his men alone. But the triangle remained. By the third night, discipline had collapsed. Soldiers refused to leave their bunks. Some prayed. Others sat staring upward as though in trance. The general emerged, face gray, eyes hollow, and walked calmly into the snow. He carried his service pistol. Without a word, he put it to his temple. The shot echoed once. His body fell stiff into the frost. And then silence. The triangle vanished, not lifted, not flown. Simply gone. One blink, it hung above them. The next, only stars remained. The men who survived were transferred within weeks. Their records erased. names scattered across distant posts. But one conscript, decades later, smuggled a note to a journalist in Prague. His handwriting shook with age, but his words were clear. It did not come to fight, it came to watch. It came for him, and when it got what it wanted, it left. The journalist disappeared before publishing. The note was found years later in a private collection. Alongside it, pressed into the paper, was a triangular watermark burned so faintly into the fibers it could only be seen at the right angle of light. No ink. No heat. Just a shape, as if the triangle was still there, waiting. The hotel clerk said the screaming started at 4:17 in the morning. Not the kind of scream born of nightmares or trauma, but something deeper. Animal, primal, like a man being torn out of himself. By the time they forced the door open, the room on the 14th floor looked like something out of a battlefield. The general was standing in the center, eyes wide, naked, except for a thin military bracelet still on his wrist. His sheets were soaked red, the walls splattered, but there were no wounds, no cuts, no broken skin. Just blood, his tests confirmed later, but with no explanation as to how it had left his body. What chilled the responders wasn't the blood, it was the words. He kept repeating them in bursts, over and over, strings of numbers, long and precise. Not names, not code words, coordinates, degrees, minutes, seconds. A journalist with contacts in military intelligence later matched the numbers. They pointed to an uninhabited atoll in the southern Pacific, a speck of land with no base, no record of human presence, and according to satellite footage, no terrain, just flat rock and wind-beaten coral. But the general had never served near the Pacific. His last active post had been in Northern Europe. His medical records were pristine, no sign of dementia, no history of hallucination. And yet, that morning, he seemed to know everything about that island, down to its soil composition, wind patterns, and seismic anomalies. He described a humming beneath the ocean and a black needle rising at night. When questioned later under sedation, he said one other thing, slowly, with tears running down his cheeks. We buried it. In 1963, they said it would sleep. They lied. No one knows what it was or what was buried. But that evening, a fire broke out in the hotel. It started in the general's room. Sprinklers failed. The floor collapsed. His body was never recovered. The official report called it a gas leak. But a maid on night shift told her sister something different. She said she saw the general's silhouette moments before the fire spread. He wasn't screaming anymore. He was standing at the window, arm raised, saluting something outside. She swore the sky behind him wasn't black, it was red, and moving. The room has been sealed ever since. Guests report strange dreams if they stay on the floor below. And every few years, someone finds a slip of paper slipped under their door. Just numbers, coordinates, always the same ones, always pointing back to the place that never had a name. The project was called Forget Me Now. No one ever confirmed if that was the real name or just the nickname whispered by corpsmen too nervous to joke out loud. But it happened. In the spring of 2004, in a sealed wing of a VA clinic outside Fallbrook, 6 Marines were transferred for neurological recovery monitoring. Their files were scrubbed, their service logs redacted down to ranks and blood types. The men had been pulled from a classified recon op somewhere between Kandahar and nowhere. All 6 came back alive, but none of them remembered what had happened, not even fragments, just static, like the memory had been cauterized at the root. One tried to describe it as a TV station that never aired, but couldn't explain what that meant. Forget Me Now was the solution. A last-ditch neurological reset developed by a DARPA-backed contractor whose name only appeared on whiteboards, never on paper. The method was surgical and chemical. The point wasn't just to erase memories. It was to erase belief in them. like they had never been real. And it worked. For 5 months, there was peace. The men reintegrated. Some were discharged quietly. Some reassigned stateside. They passed psych evaluations. They laughed again, until Sergeant Hector Avila started to draw. It began as sleepwalking. At first, he was found standing over his own bed at the clinic, humming in a slow rhythm like a lullaby with no melody. Then he started scratching into the walls. Circles, crescents, spirals nested within spirals. The shapes weren't random. One nurse recognized them from a satellite scan she'd glimpsed during a training rotation at Vandenberg. Glyphs, but not earthly ones, not military. Something older. And then came the final piece. During his last night under observation, Sergeant Avila spoke clearly while asleep. His voice was flat, calm, and unblinking. He recited a phrase in a language no one present could identify, but a linguist brought in from Langley later matched it syllable for syllable to symbols carved into lunar basalt collected during Apollo 17. Symbols no one had ever translated. They hadn't come from Earth. They hadn't even come from the moon. They were left there. The footage from that night was seized by federal agents. The nurse who reported the glyphs discharged on psychological grounds. The rest of the ward staff were relocated or disappeared. Sergeant Avila's room was sealed, his bed untouched. His last drawing etched into the tile with a plastic spoon was a perfect outline of Earth, viewed from a height that no human had ever reached, and next to it, scrawled in shaking ink, the words, "It remembers us too." He was stationed northeast of Al-Qaim, part of a reconnaissance unit tasked with mapping ancient structures long buried by desert storms. Most of what they found were Roman outposts, shattered brickwork, bone fragments bleached white, until the soldier, name withheld even in the censored after-action reports, took a wrong turn chasing a heat signature anomaly. He radioed once, said he'd found something, then silence. They found him hours later, half-conscious, slumped against a rock face that didn't register on satellite maps. His canteen was full. His GPS showed he hadn't moved in 3 days. His boots were wet. There had been no rain. He had a camera clutched to his chest. The film, yes, film, not digital, was rushed through secure processing. Only a few prints were ever made. Most were dull, rock strata, sand, more sand, a strange metal seam beneath the earth. But one photo stood out. It was taken at twilight. The shadows were long. In the frame, some object rose from the desert floor, half buried, easily 5 stories high, and arched like a rib. And near the bottom left of the frame was the silhouette of a child. It stood motionless, arms at its sides, gaze tilted upward toward the massive form behind it. But the real horror wasn't its shape, it was its texture. The silhouette was translucent. You could see the dunes through it. But its eyes, those were not hollow. They were black, solid, focused. The soldier remembered none of it. He didn't recognize the location, didn't recall taking the photo. Said he never saw a child. But that wasn't the most troubling part. The most troubling part was the file jacket that came with the photo when it was flagged by military intelligence. The name on the jacket was his, and under dependents, it listed a daughter, age 6, deceased. Date of death, 6 months before deployment. He had no daughter. None, he remembered. The photo was classified, buried deeper than even satellite captures from Groom Lake. The object it depicted was non-recoverable. And as for the silhouette, its outline was extracted by software analysts and compared against known forms. The match it triggered was not from biology databases. It came from a lunar reconnaissance archive, from an image taken in 1969, an image never released to the public. Same posture, same proportions, same gaze. The childlike thing had never aged, and under the final analysis request, handwritten in red pen, were the words, "If it is her, she found us first." They called it the Moonlight Protocol because of how they described the glow, Not heat, not weapon, just light, soft, white. Wrong. The base sat silent in the high desert, part of an off-the-books telemetry array north of Las Cruces. No markings, no names. A listening post for things that didn't use radios. Every man there had signed papers with more black ink than words. One corporal, on night rotation, wrote in his final log that the sky blinked. That's the phrase. Not shimmered, not flashed. Blinked. Like something had opened and then closed. That was the only warning. At 0300 hours, a craft was reported above grid 12. No propulsion, no sound. Just shape impossible to measure hovering. It was dark, almost cloaked. But then the light began. A slow, pale beam. It didn't sweep. It didn't search. It fell. Straight down. Like moonlight through still water. That's when the protocol triggered. Moonlight was the exact term buried in the old directives, back from 1959. If a craft ever emits visible light without heat, all security teams are to engage immediately. No warnings, no hails. Fire until silent. And they did. Every weapon trained on it. Even the railgun test units that weren't supposed to be there. Ammunition dumped by the ton into something that seemed untouched. The light stayed. The craft never moved. Then, it stopped. Not the craft, the base, every electrical system, every light, every clock, even wristwatches, everything stopped at 0317. For exactly 8 minutes and 19 seconds. And then, there was no base. The satellite feed caught only the edge of it. One frame showed a facility. The next showed fused glass stretching for miles. Not scorched. Melted. There were no bodies, no debris, no identifiers. Even the perimeter fencing was gone. The backup log in NORAD's deep archive flagged a 3-word phrase at 0319. Protocol failed. Moonlight. That phrase was never supposed to exist. To this day, the site is off limits. Drones sent to map it lose signal. Soil samples come back sterilized. And no local towns reported any explosion. No sound, no quake, just nothing. The only person who spoke of it was an engineer stationed at White Sands. He received a final ping from the base, an automated distress signal that never reached command. It contained just one word, transmitted repeatedly in Morse code. The word was ascending. And when asked what the base had been monitoring before it vanished, the engineer didn't answer. He just pointed upward and whispered, "We lit the signal," and it answered like it always does. It showed up between frames. That was the first clue. A ridge near Shah Wali Kot that had been flat desert for centuries suddenly sprouted a hill. Not over time, not with erosion or quake, just there. In the satellite image from one day to the next, a perfectly rounded formation, 200 feet high, casting no shadow at all. Forward recon was dispatched before dawn. 3 snipers, 2 spotters, and a drone operator, all highly decorated, all equipped with full recording gear. The terrain hadn't changed until it had. Their satellite uplink kept cutting. Compass readings spun. And when they reached the rise, the hill was warm. Not sun-warmed, not ambient, alive warm, pulsing, faintly, as if it had breath. They radioed back once. Just once. "Something's under us." Then silence. A thermal scan came back 30 minutes later. Nothing biological, no movement. But the hill? Still warm. Still wrong. Command hesitated to escalate. They classified the event and pulled recon back. Only no one returned. No signal, no bodies, no dust trails. The GPS trackers on their gear activated a few hours later, 100 miles south, in the air, then gone again. At dawn the next morning, another satellite pass showed the landscape as it had always been. No elevation, no anomaly, just desert, flat, unbroken, unchanged, except for one thing. In the exact coordinates where the hill had risen, there was now a perfect circular burn. 12 feet wide, charred, but not black. It shimmered faintly in infrared, and something else, imprinted into the scorched soil, visible only at high zoom, were letters, not in English, not in any language known to the analysts, but the pattern matched something stored deep in a database, recovered glyphs from a lunar anomaly encountered during a failed Chinese orbiter mission in 1999. The glyphs' translation, as close as they could get, suggested a word, either observe or correction. Nobody could agree on which. Later that year, a linguist working with Defense Intelligence woke screaming. She'd been studying the glyphs obsessively, trying to trace their route. When her team entered her quarters, they found her curled against the wall, whispering the same phrase again and again. The hills have eyes, and they do not blink. She never returned to active duty. The next satellite sweep of the area was scheduled for 3 months later, but that scan never happened. The satellite burned up in atmosphere without re-entry protocol, without distress, as if something reached up and plucked it from the sky. The records now list the event as a mapping error. The names of the recon team were redacted and reassigned to personnel who had died a decade earlier in a separate war. As for the hill, some say it still moves, just not where we can see. Not yet. Under the pale wash of a morning sky somewhere over the Pacific, a drone drifted alone. It was not the largest of its kind, but it was smart, silent, and watching. Operated remotely by a small control team tucked inside a secured bunker near Guam, it carried one simple mission: monitor open waters near a disputed zone for signs of encroachment. It had done this same loop dozens of times, clocking endless hours above the shimmering blue with no more excitement than passing clouds and the occasional fishing trawler. That day was supposed to be the same. The feed was clean, stable. A full 2 hours into the flight, the drone had already crossed into its second waypoint when something strange began to happen. Not on radar, not in any warning system. The anomaly began visually. The ocean stopped reflecting the sun. It was not immediate. It was subtle. A patch of water circular, perhaps a mile across, appeared darker, as if the sky above it no longer existed. No clouds blocked the light. No mist blurred the air. Yet the water below simply ceased to behave like water at all. It flattened. No chop, no current, no whitecaps, just stillness. The camera operators assumed sensor failure, until the drone itself sent a secondary feed confirming visual. Not a glitch, not a shadow, real. They zoomed. The circle grew sharper, not darker, just wrong, not like oil, not like glass, like depth removed, like an absence pretending to be a surface. The drone was ordered to hold position. Altitude, 25,000 feet. It did not obey. It descended, not rapidly, not sharply, smoothly, as if pulled, not commanded. Controllers panicked. Input override. Fail. Manual switch to autonomous flight. Fail. The drone continued to sink, silently and slowly, as if following something invisible, as if tethered downward by a string no one could see. At 15,000 feet, the drone's infrared activated on its own. It wasn't scheduled. It wasn't triggered by command. It just turned on. The IR image revealed a shape just beneath the surface of the water. A curve. Wide, matte black. Almost a dome, but not quite. No sharp edges. Just a swell, like a bubble frozen halfway through surfacing. And at the center of the dome, something shimmered. Not light, not heat, just motion. The shimmer twisted upward, spiraling into a cone. That cone, the feed showed, was rising, directly toward the drone. Operators began the failsafe. Hard shutdown, forced power down. The drone did not respond. The drone did not even seem to notice. Instead, it rotated, slowly. its camera tilted downward at a precise angle, 45 degrees. Then, just as the shimmer reached altitude, the feed pulsed. Once, the image froze, not with distortion, not static, not signal loss, just freeze. Then, it resumed. But what returned was not the ocean, not the shimmer. It was the drone's own camera feed, facing itself, not a reflection in water, not a second drone. It was the same camera, the same frame. Looking at itself, a perfect copy. The horizon behind it was upside down. The clouds bent the wrong direction. It was as if the drone had flown inside out. And then something blinked, just once. A reflective flash along the lens of the mirrored object. The flash came from inside the feed, not from the camera, from something behind it. That was the final frame. The footage ended with silence. No crash, no explosion, just gone. Command listed the drone as lost due to equipment failure, unrecoverable. Weather interference was blamed. No official incident was logged, except the backup recording was saved, illegally, by a tech who refused to delete it. He showed it to no one for over 3 years. Until one night in 2011, he drove 6 hours to a retired radar specialist who had once worked at Elmendorf in Alaska. The meeting took place in a church parking lot. The tape played only once. The specialist turned pale. He said the same shape had appeared over the Aleutians in 1976. It had stopped a nuclear test drill, not by jamming, not by force, just appearing. The warheads never launched. The systems rebooted with no trace of activation. And afterward, every technician had been reassigned. One vanished entirely. The specialist had kept one image, a thermal printout on old weathered paper, faded nearly to white. He pulled it from an envelope and laid it beside the paused frame of the drone's last moment. The shapes matched. Not approximately, not conceptually. Exactly. Same curvature, same dimensions, same blink. The tech asked what it meant. The specialist didn't answer. He only whispered, "They're not killing the drones. They're showing them what they are." The tape was stolen 2 weeks later. No signs of break-in, no missing gear, just that one drive. And the envelope, the tech who saved it, found unconscious in his home with no injuries. His dog was gone. His clocks were all set to different times, and his laptop had one new file on the desktop, untitled. Inside was a single image, the last frame of the drone. Except this time, the camera had a crack across it, and something beyond the camera, something just on the edge of the frame, was moving, slowly, smiling. The feed was traced back to a server that had been offline since 2004. No explanation, no source. It was deleted 2 hours after it appeared. The military now refuses to discuss the incident. FOIA requests are denied, citing ongoing risk to navigational safety. But the sea remembers, and in a 2-mile stretch near Wake Island, civilian drones have since gone missing without explanation. Always just one at a time. Always just before dawn. Sometimes, local fishermen say, the water looks flat, too flat, like glass that doesn't belong. And if you listen closely on the quiet mornings, when the sky is too calm, you can hear a faint hum, not from the ocean, from above it, from something watching, something learning, and, maybe, something waiting. The training site was ordinary by design. A forgotten square of desert just northeast of Winslow, Arizona, fenced in by rusting wire and watched only by a rotating trio of bored sentries with clipboards. For years, it hosted drone calibration exercises, artillery target practice, and the occasional desert survival drill. Nothing glamorous, nothing classified. Just dust, cacti, and the low mechanical hum of test flights echoing across the dry basin. Then, in the spring of 1997, the morning crew didn't show up for their 800-hour briefing. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't confusion. They simply stood together, out near the center grid of the field, staring at the ground like they were listening to something that hadn't stopped speaking. Their commanding officer arrived 20 minutes later, furious, and already drafting reprimands in his head. He reached the group, barked the first syllable of a curse, and then stopped short. He saw it too. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't chemical residue. It was heat. A searing presence that wasn't rising or spreading but fixed, locked into a specific outline. 5 sharp, perfect points. A star. Not a vague smudge. Not something random. The shape was unmistakable. Roughly 30 feet across, etched into the dry crust of the basin floor like it had been laser-scored from orbit. But there was no fire, no sound, no heat signature from nearby gear, and no one had touched it. When someone finally did, it didn't burn, it didn't sting, but it was wrong. The texture of the sand inside the star was different, silky, almost fluid, like powdered glass that refused to cool. It shimmered faintly, not gold, not silver. Something older than either. The soldiers were pulled back. Base command was alerted. Drones were grounded. And within the hour, unmarked trucks rolled into the area, like vultures arriving before the kill. The entire site was shut down. They didn't cover the star. They didn't try to explain it. They just built a perimeter fence and posted guards who were rotated weekly, with no explanation. Some nights, the guards heard tones, not voices, not machines, just short pulses of harmonic sound that vibrated in the bones but left no trace on recording devices. Then came the satellites. Infrared imagery, once used to track desert temperature shifts and wildlife movement, began refusing to register the area. Not the base, not the terrain, just that star. The satellites weren't blind. They weren't blocked. They simply ignored it. A data analyst with a minor contract in thermal imagery flagged the omission. He ran simulations, tested lens parameters. Everything came back clean. Still, every single heat scan curved around the shape like a magnet deflecting iron filings. He submitted a report. The report was denied review. Then, 2 nights later, his computer crashed. Every file on his desktop was overwritten by a single blank document. No title, no metadata, no size. Just a text field that flickered for 7 seconds, then disappeared. When he rebooted, the computer would no longer display any image of the star. Even saved files refused to load. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, a handful of soldiers who had first witnessed the burn mark were relocated. Some were given honorable discharges. Others were transferred to Arctic listening posts or obscure embassies in countries no one could pronounce. None of them talked again, except one. He was found in a motel outside Tucson, scribbling shapes onto the wall with black marker. Not just stars, constellations, maps, spiral glyphs with too many arms, too many paths. When the police questioned him, he asked if the sky had changed. Not, was it cloudy? Not, was it night? Just changed. Then he said something else. He whispered that stars could burn things into the earth from above, but not with fire. With memory. That was his word. Memory. The burn mark wasn't heat. It was the echo of something old, trying to remember where it had been before. He died the next morning. No cause. No signs of trauma. Just stopped. A week later, satellite records showed that for precisely 6 minutes and 13 seconds, the shape of the star pulsed on the infrared spectrum. Only once, only faintly, but enough for 3 early warning systems in Europe to trigger silent alerts. Not hostile, just present. And then, gone. Now, the spot remains untouched. Even local wildlife gives it a wide berth. No nests, no tracks, just wind-blown sand forming gentle arcs around the 5 points. A new training site was proposed nearby. It was approved, then abandoned. The approval paperwork still exists. But the reasons for cancellation? redacted, every line, even the date. People forget things in the desert. Time shifts. Trails vanish. But not that shape, not the burn. It's still there, waiting. They called it sleep conditioning, but that wasn't the right name. Not really. It wasn't sleep, and it wasn't conditioning. It was a kind of erasure with scars. The psychologist retired now, stripped of license, living in the back room of a hospice clinic in Barstow, told the story like someone recounting a dream that had started telling itself. He hadn't meant to remember. That was the whole point. But memory, he said, is like blood. You can cauterize it, freeze it, seal it off, but one day, it will find the cracks and start seeping again. They started with reconnaissance teams, men who had seen things they weren't trained for. Lights beneath the desert, silent machines over the Pacific, footsteps in the upper atmosphere. Reports came in garbled. Men stammered or fell silent entirely. A few broke down mid-sentence, speaking in languages no one recognized. That's when the brass called for help. Not cleanup, not court-martials, just forgetting. He administered the first batch of Serum-12 in 1979 under a joint program between the Department of Defense and a name he never spoke out loud. The goal wasn't to erase everything just enough. Trim the edges, sand down the images until they felt like dreams, or fever, or a movie someone else described. Then reassign the men. Fresh uniforms. New missions, new memories, clean slates. But some of the memories refused. One soldier, stationed in Greenland, kept drawing circles, perfect circles, overlapping, spiraling in on themselves. He drew them in soap on windows, in frost on trucks, in blood after a nosebleed. Another, discharged and working night shifts in Chicago, called every night for 2 years, convinced something was watching him through the street lamps. It blinked, he said, over and over. It blinks when I blink. The psychologist began to hear things too. Static behind the walls, rhythms in white noise. A hum that followed him from building to building, never louder, never closer, just present, like breath. He stopped sleeping, stopped dreaming, but not even that helped. Because the nightmares weren't his anymore. They were leaking in, dozens of servicemen, hundreds, maybe more, all told to forget, and they did, for a while. But memory is not a file. It's a wound, and wounds remember how they were made. One man woke up buried in the floor of his own home. Another found a sentence etched inside his teeth, written in metal. And a third, he just vanished. But his boots were found by a lake, filled with sand, facing the sky. They had been told to forget, but some part of them didn't listen, and that part is still awake.